are going to have this posted to our Grid Access Transformation webpage after the fact, after we get it cleaned up and posted. So, Katie, thank you for that reminder. And now we would like to hand it off to Mike Miller, our Senior Vice President of Transmission, for some opening remarks. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Number one, thanks for being here today. I think it's going to be great to hear the updates that we have, and then two, I want to say thanks for the partnership throughout. You know, it's been a journey, as you all know, and will continue to be a journey. So I think as we keep working our way through this, we just appreciate all the feedback, all the patience, and cooperation as we've gone through. So it's really been helpful, meaningful. I really appreciate it from myself personally being in this position. It's been great, the connections we've all made and will continue to make. So thanks for being here. And I'm really looking forward to the customer-led workshops coming up too. So we'll get through today and give you all some great updates, and then we'll continue to engage from here. So that's all. Just wanted to say a quick thanks, and I'll hand it over to Katie.
All right,
Okay,
Katie?
thank you, Mike. Thank you and welcome to everybody. I'm Katie Shekels. I'm our manager of the transmission sales group. I'm gonna kick us off, run through the agenda this morning. You can see the agenda on the screen here. The front end of the day is going to be focused on current state. Abby Nolt is going to be walking us through a recap, a reminder of the current state TSEP challenges. And then we're going to walk through some current state process mapping, really in response to some customer requests to have some better visualizations of some of the things that we were discussing previously. And then we'll pivot. I'll share some information about us shifting from trying to implement transition through business practice process to tariff proceeding process. Speak to that, and then we will wrap up with some next steps. And as Sean said, please raise your hand if you've got questions throughout this. It's not a huge agenda. We have 3 hours carved out. I don't anticipate we'll use all that. So if you have any sort of questions, put in the chat, raise your hand. We've got plenty of time for that. With that, I'll hand over to Abby.
Thanks, Katie. So I know that we're using a single mic, so Sean is lighting up, but I am on camera. If you might just have to click over a few. So the current state of our TSEP challenges, again, as Katie mentioned, this is in response to some of the feedback that we had heard over the last several workshops and in your written feedback. We just wanted to reinforce that conducting an actionable 65 gigawatt study of BPA's transmission system. Actionable for us means that what comes out the other end is a suite of plans of service that we could proceed with to resolve the needed service. So that's what we mean by actionable. And in order to do that, we would either need to model unrealistic load increases or unrealistic generation dispatch patterns to achieve the load resource balance that's necessary to perform a power flow study. Some details around that are that it is possible that we could run a host of scenarios to look at different generation dispatch patterns to try to achieve the kind of balance that we need. But again, the estimation in our expert engineering judgment is that those dispatch patterns would not be realistic. There are ways to force a gen load balance that it's not something that we believe would be realistic. And so what would then come out the other end of a study like that would be a series of plans of service that we don't believe are the right ones, where the system actually needs to be reinforced. Or we would need to batch the TSRs into smaller megawatt studies. As we've described before, but we are reinforcing here again today, that is at this time, our best estimate is that the batches that we believe would not require unrealistic load or generation patterns would have us batching roughly 10 to 20 gigawatt batches, and that using our current TSEP timelines, it would take between 7 and 8 years to process just the existing queue. And while we were undergoing those studies, we would continue to be getting more requests in. So this is not a process that batching is not an approach that would get us out of the pickle that we are currently in. And it would also require that we would have sufficient, in the event we could conduct a study of the full 65 gigawatt queue, which again, we don't believe we can, but if we did, we would also have to have sufficient access to capital to initiate what would then be expected to be a massive collection of plans of service. So those are the key criteria that we have been using to arrive at our assessment that we cannot perform a study using our existing processes and study protocols. I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions. Maybe while you're thinking about raising your hand, there are a host of other engineers in this room. I am not an engineer myself, so I am speaking on their behalf.
We have Alex.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Oops. Alex, go ahead and raise your hand again. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you are go.
Perfect. Alex Sorsben, New Sun. So I appreciate that. And I'm hoping to just get maybe a little more detail. And we've talked a lot of, engineers and done some of these system impact studies and all the rest. I'm sort of curious within that batch framework why that would take 7 to 8 years. And I'll just throw out an assumption that, large range 6 to 12 months. We'll probably get 10 to 15 gigs, more like 15 to 20, especially with all the roadmaps and the last TSEPs building upon that. So I'm just curious a little more detail into why it would take so long to kind of go down a batch process, which seems to make sense. But that would be kind of one. And then the other one was just the sufficient massive capital to initiate, just a little more detail on what that means. It's probably my lack of knowledge, but I don't understand that. And I'm curious what that ramification or what that means to Bonneville in that light.
Okay. One follow-up question before we answer, Alex. You referenced doing a 12 gigawatt study. Were you talking about another system where someone has been able to do, or Bonneville system?
I was just referencing some of the conversations we've had behind the scenes with some modelers and folks that do work in the region. And their estimation of 15 to 20 gigs was 6 to 12 months, depending on who was doing it. So it seems more like a 3 to 4 year process, not a 7 to 8 year process.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So we can wade into this. I'm going to hand the mic over to some of the folks, but I'll first start with as far as and I don't know that we have someone in the room to help us with the access to capital, like details, but I will say, Bonneville does have limited access to capital. It's not endless. We don't have an endless supply of access to capital. So if we were, again, that third point presumes that we would be able to conduct the 65 gigawatt study, which again, we don't believe we can. But if we were, what would likely come out the other end would be a massive collection of plans of service. And the current estimates for the project that we already have in flight, the last estimate I saw was we're in billions now, and the host of plans of service that would come out of a study of this size would likely necessitate several $1 billion more in upgrades. We do not have that access to capital. So if you still have questions about that, please go ahead and put them in the chat or submit them in writing, and we will make sure that we get you a more thorough answer. With regards to why our estimate is 7 to 8 years, I'm going to hand that over to Chris Gilbert.
Sure. Thank you, Abby. It's Chris Gilbert here. So one, we have experience, right? We have run, 3 gigawatt to 10 gigawatt studies on an annual basis. And then when we did our 17 gigawatt study, it was a 2-year basis. So we have experience about what's behind that timeline. I will say in my chatting with various study types of engineers, they sort of hyper focus on their step of what a TSEP study is. And there's a lot of preceding time and legwork, and there's a lot of legwork that comes with putting out the results and putting out agreements and all the stuff that follows on. So when we're talking here about a 7 to 8 year process, we're talking our whole TSEP cycle, not just study time.
Okay. And that would be to get the full 65 gigawatts is what you're saying, doing it in batches, the whole process
Yeah.
unfolded.
So if we broke it down into the, roughly 17 gigawatt batches that we know took 2 years to go, do the process end to end, do the math, you get up into this 7.5 year time frame.
No, perfect. It'd be great to explore that in more depth as we get to, next conversations and things, as it sounds like the process will be opening up. I did have just one little last question, Abby, and it may get punted, but thinking about the access to capital, is that Bonneville reaching into borrowing authority to provide that capital? And then is there a reason why Bonneville couldn't just assume the evolving grid projects, which I understand to be receiving funding and things now, and be able to provide offers based on what is going to be developed in the future that's been identified through the last few TSEPs, and they are the evolving grid 1.0 and 2.0 projects instead of all the future upgrades on top of that? Is there a way to look at it and make offers based on what's in plan development now and mitigate some of those plans of service in future? And I also wonder, plans of service in the future and here your costs for expansion, you're going to get people to leave the queue and not take on those obligations regardless. And so getting that information out, getting those studies out so people can make those decisions, I think you will naturally see people starting to draw back from the queue. So it's sort of a 2-point question. Can we just look at the projects in Evolving Grid 1.0 and 2.0 and find offers and then work on what we'd be looking at in the future? And maybe that flows to future state conversations.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask for Chris to start off and answer here. I do know we have already done a preliminary assessment of the sort of unsubscribed leftover capacity from the existing evolving grid 1.0 and 2.0 projects. There isn't much left over. So it's not perceived that we would have a lot of additional capacity to enable a lot of offers. It wouldn't reduce our queue size significantly, if at all. But Chris, go ahead.
To build on that, those are also, the $5 billion roughly of the TSEP evolving grid projects only cover 4 of BPA's paths. So you really, the number of projects and things multiply with the magnitude of the requests because they start coming from more and more diverse areas of the system, start having different impacts across the system. So it just creates an exploding number of projects. In our proposal that we presented, in the 2 July workshops, we did have a step in there where we would try to, look into this analysis of the evolving grid projects and find out what capacities there could be offered to TSRs in the unstudied queue before they got studied, and so that we could sort of trigger a decision mechanism. If folks are willing to pay for the foundation, then we could certainly do the more in-depth study and complete the plan of service. If they're not willing to pay for, scoping costs or environmental costs for the foundational projects, then we wouldn't need to study those. So we had that kind of built in as a way to help us, further kind of manage the volume that makes up the 65 gigawatt. And if you recall, we were going to do that after the data exhibit validation. So we were really going to try to get down to the critical queue and then take that next step to see what that capacity could do.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Lon, you are next, and I thought you were unmuted, but hold on 1 second. Lon, can you raise your hand again one more time, please? All right, Lon, I'm going to do something real quick here. I'm going to make you a panelist so you can take yourself off mute because some of this functionality is not working. Sorry, folks, we had our systems upgraded today, so we're kind of wading through this. But then I will remove you from the panel, Lon, as soon as you're done with your question. So, Lon, you are a panelist now, so you can unmute yourself.
Estimate, I should say, at this point of the expectation about how that tariff process, how long, I don't want to get into the details, but how will that tariff process possibly reduce this estimated 7 to 8 years? All right, is the tariff process intended to get us down to 5 years, 4 years? You know, that's the kind of question I'm curious about.
Thanks, Lon, for the question. So without forecasting what will occur in the 212 proceeding, you may recall that in our previous presentation, when we were endeavoring to do this through business practice updates solely, that one of the elements of the GATT proposal was to implement readiness requirements and make them retroactively applicable to the entirety of our queue. Our estimate was that was the mechanism that would help us shrink the queue to a more manageable size.
Okay, so go through the tariff process, come up with new readiness requirements, apply them to everybody, queue shrinks, get through the queue faster.
Again, I can't forecast what will occur in the 212 proceeding, but that had been our proposal as we were navigating previous workshops,
Okay.
that we would apply retroactive readiness requirements.
Okay, all right, I understand, I think what we think we know at this point. Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you. And yeah, great. Any other questions? I don't see any of their hands raised. Okay, we can always come back to this. As Katie mentioned, we have plenty of time. So moving on to slide 4. The current state of our path to firm, how that essentially this is, and beginning with the submission of a long-term transmission service request or a forecast that we are not able to accommodate through our LARC process, all the way to long-term firm service being offered. Again, this is current state. This is how it works today. So submission of the TSR, a deposit is made. That cost these days is $10,000 per TSR. Sorry, I may have mixed that up. Deposit and processing fee.
Well, we have the next slide that's got all the actual numbers on it. So
Okay. There we go. I flipped them. So the refundable deposit is required, as well as a non-refundable processing fee of $10,000. I apologize that I mixed those two up. Data exhibit is required. A customer must submit that. There is then a validation step that is done internally to Bonneville to validate that data exhibit and conduct any follow-up with the customer on anything that needs to be cured, any questions we have. There is a business practice that describes how we move through data exhibit validation, and if and when a problem is identified, how long we will coordinate with customers to try to remedy that. But assuming that the data exhibit validation is conducted, we then move to commercial assessment. For those of you who, like me, who were very familiar with our old ATC process, the commercial assessment essentially replaces that. So what this is a panel of experts that look at requests and they make assessments about, yes, this point of receipt and this point of delivery were requested, but what we know about the system or that customer's unique transmission portfolio or a host of other things that could come to bear when we're evaluating the impact. If we were to grant the service, what is the estimated impact? That's what the commercial assessment panel does, is they make that determination. Through that determination, they determine whether or not we can offer long-term firm service now, and if not, we offer a study agreement, or they wait until the next TSEP to be offered a study agreement. So this is not to be confused with the OASIS status of study. always the status of study just means that we're still processing the request and evaluating things. So when we say long-term firm or study, if we can offer the long-term firm service, we do that as quickly as we can. If it requires additional analysis, it waits for the next P-step cycle. Again, this is current state, how this works. At that point, cluster study agreement is sent out and a cluster study fee of $15,000. I believe that's per megawatt.
$150 per megawatt.
$150 per megawatt. In this example, thank you.
Yes.
In this example, this is a 100 megawatt
Request.
request.
Yes.
So $150 per megawatt study fee. Then, assuming that the study is concluded and we identify plans of service necessary to satisfy that request, we then offer a preliminary engineering agreement or a PIA. If that's executed, they then fund. In this example, it's a $12 million total, but this is just an example. They are not always that quantity. Once a PIA is executed and the funds are supplied by the customer, we then also assess whether or not we can offer conditional firm service if it happens to be available and we can manage that adequately and reliably. We will make that offer if we can, while the customer, and then they have a choice, bridge service versus reassessment service and a variety of others. So assuming that the customer takes the conditional firm service or that it turns out it's not available, then there's a series of other agreements that come. Once PIA is concluded, we then would offer an environmental study agreement, which the customer would have to execute and then supply additional funds for that. In this example, it's $2 million per project. Again, that's just an example. They're not always that quantity. And then once ESA is concluded, then construction security, that language is really tiny. A construction agreement and securitization is required. So I want to make the point here that at no point do we ever ask customers to, quote, pay for upgrades. Bonneville system, Bonneville funds all of the upgrades that we perform on our system, again, current state. So the funds that are required at this point are to securitize that bill so that we've got some skin in the game from that customer. I'll leave it to Chris to talk about some details about those funds. But once the project is built and energized, we then execute the long-term firm service agreement with the customer. So Chris, I acknowledge I went through that quickly and very high level and fumbled a few things. So please clarify anything I may have missed.
Can I provide a little context first?
Sure.
So, and before we get to Chris, so in the last public meeting, the workshops, we heard loud and clear that some process charts would be very helpful to understand how everything's linked together, in particularly when we were looking at the transition in future. Now, obviously, based on what we are going to talk about next after this process chart, what may be the future state is still TBD. However, what we realize is that having a process chart that shows where we are today, current state, was important to us all being on the same page and starting at the same place. So that's why the SMEs pulled this together and are presenting it today, just so that everybody's kind of on the same page. So just wanted to let folks know, Sydney, if you're on the phone, I want to make sure that you are aware that you helped influence this, as did many of you at the last workshop. So thank you for that feedback. Hopefully this isn't what exactly was asked for, but it's hopefully a start and something that we can work on as we move forward.
Thank you for that context, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Chris.
Thanks, Abby. So I'm going to start at that PIA box, that PIA sign and fund execute. One of the things that you can't see in a chart like this is time. So once projects are funded for their scoping, they take anywhere from 2 to 4 years to go through scoping. So there's quite a bit of time that occurs between the PIA and that ESA. And so before BPA tenders the environmental study agreements, the scoping work is completed, if you will. And we provide we call it a preliminary engineering report. We provide a report that updates the design of the project, updates timeline for energizing the project, updates cost of the project. So That comes in a package with the environmental study agreement, that PIA report. So it closes that out and then sets us up to move into the next stage, which is the ESA funding. The other thing to kind of note in there is that once projects are funded for scoping, they are on their own timeline. So there's a big switch in here about the timeline being driven kind of about the assessment of a TSR to how long does it take to energize projects. And so if a customer has, in this example, 3 projects that make up a plan of service, they're all going through scoping. One might go through really fast, one might go through really slow. And so when you get to the environmental study part of it, typically the environmental study agreement is 1 project at a time. As the projects get there, we move them into the next step. From there, once NEPA is completed, BPA makes a decision, will we construct the project or not, and at what rate? So that decision, what's the intent of the rate? And so you hear this with our evolving grid 1.0s, where BPA has said our intent to is embed the cost in the initial proposal of the rate case. And so we've been using that language pretty religiously because, we all know rates happen in the rate case. So we can't predispose that, but we're providing an indication so that we can, move ahead with construction and move ahead with types of service offers. So BPA decides it's going to construct. We put together a service offer that's tendered to the customer, not signed by BPA. So this is not how offers are normally tendered. Normally BPA signs it, sends it, the customer countersigns. In this case, the offer is tendered, unsigned by BPA. We determine who's going to take service from signing that. They sign return. We know who's going to take service, and that allows us to establish the pro rata share for security. When we can establish the pro rata share for security, we provide everyone with their security requirements. And once the security is funded, BPA then countersigns the agreement and moves on with construction, and the firm service starts when all of the projects in that plan of service energize.
Are you ready for a question?
Sure.
Okay. Jake, you should be off mute now.
Yeah, hey everybody, Jake Stevens, Newson Energy. This is great, thank you. And just noting one thing, I think that's worth clarifying. So in the original submissions, right, at some point there's also an option to check the box for what type of conditional firm service you might wish to be considered for, either not at all or number of hours conditional firm and or system conditions conditional firm. So I wanted to highlight that, and just probably helpful for you to confirm that for people to kind of note that, and also wanted to kind of highlight that as we're talking about the reform relative to, for the past 10 years, my first requests were in 2016. So at that time, I think there was conditional firm, just generally, there wasn't like modified versions of it. And then in 2018-19, your team was responsive to one of our recommendations that sort of create some limitations on the curtailment hours so that folks could be more comfortable signing conditional firm products. So it was a little less vague and unlimited, at least from a customer standpoint. But there's kind of been iterations of that. So everybody that's in the long-term firm pending queue today, selected and or signed contracts along the way with you to proceed with studies and PIAs and however far they are in the process based on some sort of initial election of a formal product offering. Does that sound correct?
Sorry, you're gonna let me tackle the conditional firm part first, and then ask you to hit that other question again. That's correct. Your description about a customer, when a customer gets their cluster study agreement, it's in that agreement that they would request to be studied for conditional firm and under which type, whether it was number of hours or system conditions. So that is correct. And then
Great.
hit me again with the second part of your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and thanks. And I think just establishing that is part of kind of the basis of proceeding and kind of all the contracts that follow as we're thinking about reforms. I think it's just worth highlighting lots of the people who have participated to date have set forth based on expectations, and everybody, them and all of the people that did and did not proceed that are in the queue and not in the queue, made those types of elections, et cetera. So there's lots of distortions that occur if you change those things on a backward looking basis. I think are just worth highlighting that are kind of the contractual backdrop of where we are today. But also I want to note that, the knobs on that product and future studies, I think are probably a healthy area to look at future refinements. Anyway, so the second part of my question, gosh, now I forgot what the second part of my question was. Can you remind me there, and I had one quick other clarification that I wanted to make.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't because I was noodling on the first question.
No problem. I guess I'll say on a clarification, like as you're talking through this, just linguistically for everybody on the line, like you're saying project a lot. And it may also be worth, just so everybody kind of gets it, just talking about when we get a study, you guys provide a plan of service, you either can or can't, like what is a plan of service? It is comprised of BPA projects, which are different from customer generation projects, et cetera, just as for folks that are trying to like calibrate how this fits together so people aren't hearing customer project when you mean BPA project and so forth. I think just nomenclature-wise, that'll be helpful.
Yeah, let me touch on that. That's a great point because in a lot of the customer comments that we've gotten, there's a lot of mix-up between this and GI and GI process. So so that nomenclature is important. I just drew a blank.
Well, as you're
regathering, hit me again with the topic.
So you guys, you do a study, you come up with, you issue a report, right? It basically says,
plan of service. Yeah, sorry.
Here's
Thank
the
you.
options that come out of the report. They look like A, B, C, D.
Yeah, so it's important that everyone recognizes that when a TSR comes out of the cluster study, it gets a plan of service. A plan of service can be comprised of one or more projects. And it's once when the PIAs come out, the PIA covers all of the scoping costs on a customer's pro rata share basis for each of the projects that's needed in their plan of service. But from that point forward, projects take on their own lives and their own time frames. And that's how you get to an environmental study phase at different points in time for different projects. And it takes all the projects to come together after construction for the firm service to be energized, lack of better terms. In service. So there's a plan of service, one or more projects. The projects kind of do their own life, and then as construction happens, each project starts energizing, and the plan of service starts coming back together. And when the plan of service is complete, the long-term firm service goes in service.
And one additional component, and I know we've talked about this, is that the plan of service can include finding, and frequently does include finding, of impacts or potential impacts on a third-party transmission provider system. Those impacts also have to be resolved prior to any award of long-term firm service by Bonneville in one way or another. That can look a variety of ways, but it does need to be resolved first.
And hopefully people understand that the 100 megawatts is a 10% pro rata share of the 1,000 megawatt total megawatt commitment, and it then is used to calculate the pro rata shares of the various study costs and securitization for construction.
In your example.
In this example, thank you.
Yeah, and those are great. I think this has really helped clarify, because I'm glad you guys are trying to help people kind of grok the different pieces of this. I think like when you get a study report, like one option is, you know, if people read the last TSAP report, which I think is relevant to kind of where we're going, you know, you get it, you know, offer, hey, looks like everything's cool. Here's you go. Here's an offer. And then it's sign it or not. You don't sign it, you're out. You get your deposit back. You do sign it, you're committed to 5 years of paying for transmission service at that rate at some point for, you know, forever, irrevocably. And so that's also a very binding financial commitment when people choose to move forward at that point. That shouldn't be lost as we're talking about this. Or no, we got to figure out how to build something. And sometimes you could have the same project request the same service 100 megawatts at a time, and the first 100 megawatts gets a clean bill of health. The second one gets something minor, like the south of Alston Cat Bank upgrades that BPA is already building, and 4 years later you get service, and maybe it's so small that they can say, conditional service actually works on this. We know the curtailment's small enough, we're going to make an offer. There's only one little problem, so sometimes Bonneville will do that. That's generally what, in our experience, the CF looks like. And then after that, it might be, oh, we need to build Cross Cascades project, Big Eddy Chamawa. That year, when that one was triggered, it's like 2,000 megawatts of requests that all triggered it. So each request got like 100, 200, 300, 400 grand allocated. And that's what that PIA funding looked like. But you had to pay that to proceed. And if you didn't want to, you're out. Last year, most everybody got multi-million-dollar PIA fundings. Pretty much every request after the first, you know, dozen or so got $1 million, $2 million, $5 million. Their pro rata allocations very quickly accumulated to being pro rata. Almost every request got half a dozen to a dozen 500 kV type builds. And so the allocations of that PIA stuff across everybody who got a little bit of it ended up being pretty big. Anyways, thank you for that.
Yeah. All right, Abby, thanks for that, Jake. And Chris, you're good?
I think we're good.
All right.
I think we're good. And I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we can move on to the next, over.
All right. Hold on, Tashiana. I'm trying.
Oh, okay.
Tashiana,
Sorry.
are you?
Yeah,
You
can you
should
hear
be
me?
off mute, Tashiana. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry for the late hand raise. This is very helpful to see, and you know, when looking through your business practices, there's also kind of a helpful TSEP overview that sort of shows the phases and typically how long they take. One question I have, and I think I know the answer, but just wanted to confirm, all of the studies that are conducted are either conducted by Bonneville through your, I think you call it the primary capacity model, or through a contractor through the secondary capacity model. Is that correct? But it's kind of studies are kept within Bonneville. It's not something that currently customers have the opportunity to, you know, conduct or offer to Bonneville. Or can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can speak to that some. So studies probably being used a little too loose for this. Customers pay for the cluster study. That's really the only study. And because BPA clusters, we put that system impact and facility study into kind of one process and one package. So you'll see the tariff says, you know, you've got 60 days to do one, 60 days to do the other. BPA and TSEP, we say we endeavor to do this in 120 days. That's the combining of those steps. That's the study. When you get to scoping, BPA uses either internal or external resources. And you touched on the primary capacity model, PCM, or the secondary capacity model, SCM. So those are the two models that we use. We decide that on a project by project basis, what project is best suited for which one of those models to do the scoping and engineering and the beginning design work for a project. We reevaluate that again as we move into, as it goes through the line, and when we get to the ESA, there becomes more of a balance between the internal and the external. So, or if we use secondary capacity model, we might use that for more design work, but we own the NEPA work. So there becomes a little blurrier line in the environmental study part of that, of what's internal, external, but in the scoping, it's very clear we either assign a project to one model or the other.
Thank you. That's really
That makes
helpful. And if you don't mind, could I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly.
Great. So recognizing, and I completely respect the fact that you're trying to describe the current state. Do you envision, or what barriers do you see to potentially enable customers to bring forward studies? Is it that it's sort of a cluster and there's a number of customers participating, or do you see any opportunities there that might help supplement Bonneville and kind of put them in more of a verifier role, or I guess as I'm looking at this process, second part of my question is, as I'm looking at the process, I'm thinking, okay, you can limit the number of TSRs that enter the process to make it more efficient and reduce the workload, or you can make the process itself somehow more efficient. And so that's kind of why I'm thinking about that line of thinking.
Yeah.
So do you have barriers, or can you help me understand?
Let me hit a couple of things. We did the 2022 study was 11 gigawatts, and we did it in a year. So I think in general, BPA feels like we were really good at the TSEP process and had it pretty efficient. That took a few years to build up with a couple of 3 gigawatts, and then a 5 and a 6, and then hit the 11, and we did it in a year, and we felt pretty good about that. So I don't know that there's a whole lot of streamlining in the TSEP process. Whether they're out in construction, I don't know. In the future state, we've got work that we're acknowledging there to be done. We have evaluated whether there's what could be done for the cluster study. Like, is there things that could be done externally? And it keeps coming around to that part of it is best that BPA does it, because it's, BPA knows its system, understands its system. And so the study and the development of the projects that would mitigate the constraints on our paths and our system would be best owned by us. And then I would need the engineers to speak to that better.
I think too, a component of, again, as we're describing the cluster study, that is our primary avenue to processing the requests that we get en masse. In order to have a single customer conduct a study of their own, it would necessitate either we disclose all of the other information from the other customers' requests to them in our model, along with releasing our model to them, so that it could be conducted, or it would require conducting an individual study for just that one customer. And we didn't put it in the process flow here. We still do allow customers to request individual studies if they don't want to participate in the cluster study that's part of TSEP. However, we don't conduct individual studies until after the conclusion of the TSEP. So there's a very narrow window of time when we could conduct that or allow a customer to conduct that themselves. And so I don't know that it would save much time.
There's one additional component that we've kind of talked about internally, which is by the time we do the essentially communication and processes necessary to enable a contractor to do study work, that alone is a significant expenditure of time and resources. And so there's a loss of efficiency that would go with undertaking the process in that manner. That is fairly significant, we think.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You've kind of been,
I was going to say, long story short, we've looked at it pretty hard, and we keep coming back to, for the cluster study, it's better done internally.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks so much for kind of noodling over that. I know that we have had some experiences with other transmission providers somehow tackling those barriers. And, maybe I'll try to inquire with folks that are, a little bit more familiar with how do other transmission providers do it. And can round back and offer those up. But, totally respect and appreciate your kind of talking through that with me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Jake and Alex, I know that you guys have your hands raised up, and Robert, you are off mute right now. We'll get to Alex, you next, and then Jake. Robert, go
Thank
ahead.
you. Yeah, jumping back to that slide and going to the section on commercial assessment, could you give me a better sense of what's being assessed commercially in that stage? And are there any criteria or a list of factors that you guys have identified for that assessment? Thank you.
We don't have anything written or disclosed publicly on that. The commercial assessment panel was implemented in 2018 before we retired the long-term ATC methodology in 2022. So we test drove the commercial assessment technical panel against the ATC calculations and a purely PTDF driven, so PTDF, our transfer distribution factor. We have a calculator that you can still go out and utilize on our external websites that allows you to use PTDF to give a rough approximation of, if I were to plug in load at this location and generation at this location at this amount, how would it impact the system? One of the things that calculator doesn't take into account is that often when a customer submits a request, it doesn't result in new load. It's not because there is new load somewhere. It's very likely that they are offsetting some of their generation, and so it actually looks more like, and I'm using air quotes, redispatch of generation on the system to make room. And all of those sorts of things are very one-off, unique to each TSR that is submitted, considerations that we want to bring to bear when we're thinking about. So essentially what that panel is charged with doing is use your expert engineering judgment, your knowledge of the customer's contract transmission portfolios, their rights, how they've impacted the system in the past, how often do they schedule to utilize their transmission rights, a series of very unique features to determine if we were to grant them this service, what is our best estimate of how the system would be impacted. And we test drove this in parallel with the PTDF calculator for several years and determined that the commercial panel was better at estimating the estimated impacts to the system than PTDFs were. So what we did was retire the ATC methodology and just fully rely on this panel of engineers to use their knowledge of the system in every unique circumstance that's pretty difficult to establish principles for in a manner that we could, for example, communicate this to you in a business practice. So a long way of saying no, but it's because of just sort of the commercial sensitivity of some of this information, and that there's always new things that they're becoming aware of as they bring their expert judgment to determination about whether or not we should award service.
Great, that really helps. And just to sort of put a nail in it, you're not seeking to assess the commercial impact on Bonneville as an agency of a given transmission request, or assess the commercial viability of the underlying retail entity that might be driving a transmission request, correct?
No, we are specifically looking at an assessment we're calling balls and strikes. If we thought if we granted this service, do we think it would impact the system this way, that way, or a third way? Like how do we estimate it would impact our transmission system? What flows would result if we granted this service? That's what they're trying to estimate.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Alex.
Thank you, Alex, Newsun Energy. I just wanted to follow back, and I have an initial comment and then an example question for you. But I wanted to kind of touch on the retroactive rule change, and I think that is one of the most severe risks to the region, and what we're talking about in terms of changes here is looking back and changing the rules of that game retroactively. I think that really can have massive impacts and consequences on resource development, transmission development, which is poles, wires, capacitors, substations, and then those underlying investments that facilitate that. So I think that is a really big concern I have that we really need to consider in what this ultimately looks like. And so thinking about retroactive rule change, I want to just kind of touch on this PIA and thinking about requests that have come in. So if you have already funded a PIA, you've kind of committed in that, are those at risk of getting these commercial readiness criteria or this retroactive rule change as we progress forward?
No.
Yeah. So this is Chris Gilbert again. No, we have said several times that the retroactive part of this is, pre-study for the TSRs that are unstudied, not TSRs that are under existing agreements, whether that's PIAs or bridge agreements or both or environmental study agreements. Those have very different contractual obligations. So our intent was not to apply any data exhibit validation to those, for purposes, I guess, of removing them or managing the queue with them. And that's, if you look at this chart, that is all pre-study activity, right? This is before even commercial assessment. So there's a bit of a gray area of, these are TSRs in the study. They're not quite there yet in the process. They got held up before we even got to study.
So it's that when we use that 65 gigawatt number, that's really what we're focused on.
Correct. Unstudied.
I'll just join in here. We have, when you guys implemented the data exhibit changes to your form before, you did take things that you had previously accepted both before and after the study and change the requirements from them, and it resulted in removals from the queue. So I guess we have a particular sensitivity, and also, both as and you did so last time by sort of inventing commercial readiness criteria, something you added through a non-tariff process to the data exhibit. And so that we definitely lost TSRs, both ones that had signed PIAs and ones that had been submitted and validated already under the rules at the time, and then were essentially taken back from us. And so I think our concern is you are clearly proposing to change and add additional commercial readiness and do that through this data exhibit policy, which you clearly believe can be done outside of a rate case. And we have already experienced those things changing and causing us to lose queue positions that had funded millions of people.
Jake, this is Katie, and I'll talk about it when we get a little bit, or when we get past the current state. So I just want to reiterate, this is current state that they're talking about. They're not talking about the proposals that we've been discussing over the last few months. And we don't intend to talk about the proposals today. That's not our intention today.
Talk about the what?
Because because when we get there later today, what we're sharing is that we are moving into a 212 process where we can have these deeper dive conversations. We'll have that formality around it. So I just want to say we didn't intend to talk about the proposals today. We'll move those into the 212 proceeding.
But I think we're all clarifying. This is, and I appreciate it. This is a great slide. This is a discussion, and I just want to encourage everybody else on the phone. This is the heart and the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, and whatever the vegan equivalent of that is, right? This is the whole thing. So I think a lot of questions here about how this worked and has worked are relevant. And so I like the answer that we're never going to take your TSR away after you fund a PIA. I think we have other issues with commercial readiness, but that isn't our actual experience. And so thus we have a legitimate concern. And I think I want others to understand that too. And second, some of the proposals that were put forward by Bonneville in this process were to go back through the long-term firm pending queue from everything that's sitting there waiting for the last 5, 10, 8 years, whatever that is, and revisit them and say, here's an offer. If you don't take it, you're out of the queue. And so those are all in that backward-looking change risk issue. Those are very scary things. And the bigger issue here, as we talk about all of this and looking at these things and the PIA funding, whatever, honestly, I don't think this is that broke. I think we just have a big flood volume. I think you guys do great
Okay.
studies and everything, you just said, but I do think that, the dollars involved from the customer and the decision to make those payments and fund them are really relying on stability, and
Okay,
that is
can we,
destabilizing
can you,
to fund them.
pause so we can respond?
Yeah.
Could I respond to that? We have not revalidated data exhibits historically. However, we have in place in our business practices today and have had for quite some time a requirement that data exhibits remain valid through the course of the process. So that means while the preliminary engineering and environmental study agreement processes are taking place, which cover a span of multiple years, those data exhibits do need to remain valid or the request is no longer valid. And that is not a new requirement. That requirement has been in place for quite some time. The only place where you could have experienced the kind of thing that you're describing is if that data exhibit information that you previously provided became invalid.
Well, or you changed the policy for the data exhibit.
Nope.
So this is a really good, I think, transition. Thank you, Jake and Alex, to get to our next stage, because this is kind of the meat and guts of today's announcement. Appreciate everybody being patient while we walked through this example.
Guys, can I ask one more question just to help?
If it's is it relevant to this slide?
It is this
just because
slide,
we want to get to. Okay.
So I mean, you guys described like that process and sequence well, and I think, again, I encourage anybody else that wants to like make sure they get this to talk through those timelines involved. But I also think it's worth, I guess, asking you guys to clarify and explain a little bit of like, for the general audience out there, of like, what makes a conditional firm offer possible? Like, there's very limited conditions in which you guys do that, and it's a helpful, useful tool. It's something smart and great you guys already do. I think understanding how that works, that's kind of the baseline of what knobs you might turn further, I think is really important. And second, as we think about the timelines involved for these Bonneville projects for the plan of service, I feel like we really shifted in this last study to like a watershed moment where we went from, lots of small projects, sometimes no projects, to sometimes big projects, to, the last study had, probably 3/4 of the requests got a dozen or more major projects. And so in the context of that bottom part of the slide you have there, talking a little bit also like, what is the timeline to service? And for example, in particular, like if you posted that $12 million and you were a somewhat typical request in the last TSEP, how many years is that $12 million going to be sitting there before potentially you get service? Just kind of talk through a couple of those scenarios. I think it's super relevant to how much money is sitting where and whether people will ever give it to you or not, and so forth as we talk about this.
Okay. You're asking multiple questions. So this is Tasha Bryan. I'm the Conditional Firm Program Manager. And so I think your initial question was, what do we look at when we're offering conditional firm?
Right. Conditional firm, and then the second part was just timelines and dollars to service kind of scenarios. Thanks.
Yeah, when we're looking at a conditional firm offer, traditionally we have been, utilizing information out of the study to see what kind of constraints that the customer has. And so for a long period of time, most of the plan of service was associated with our flow-based paths. And over time, we have seen more subgrid paths pull up. And so that's why 2023 looked a little bit different. Now having, a bit more experience, I think that we still have the, a decent ability to identify, possible constraints associated with the path. And so when we're looking at a TSR, essentially what we're trying to figure out is if we were to offer service on this particular TSR, could it be managed? Could all the constraints be managed? And so that looks at, do we have available sales paths that could already manage that? Is there some kind of path that we could create and some time that could manage it? And so, for example, with I think Rock Creek John Day, we made what's called an operational path. And So, you know, that's used to manage that particular path. Sometimes we go and we look and we try to find a path to manage the constraint, and maybe we're unable to. For customers that have, you know, maybe multiple constraints, sometimes what can happen is over time, you know, maybe some things that issues that we weren't able to solve just naturally resolve, you know, through other means, and then whatever is remaining makes it possible to make an additional firm offer. So they're each pretty unique, but those are the types of things that we're looking at.
And that is current state and all potential stuff that may be up for discussion moving forward in the next process, which I think is a nice segue to get to our next slide. Jake, is that sufficient for now? There's going to be lots of time to ask more questions later.
Yeah, I guess on that point, that was a good description, but it's generally like when there's kind of like only one sort of pinch point, not like something else major, right? I mean, I think just like if you have 10 upgrades, you're not going to get a conditional firm offer. It's sort of like when there's one or two things and there's some other pinch point that makes you guys think you can get there, right? Just kind of conceptually, just as people are thinking about, because like CF doesn't work when you do 10 upgrades. Yeah.
It's all about the ability to manage the request. And so it's, you know,
it's not how many constraints need to be overcome, it's which one and whether there is that managed path that Tasha's indicating. It's not the numeric findings.
Great, thanks. And then, sorry, the part two of my question was just, I think, talking a little bit about the timeline in that last three boxes of your slide there, relative to kind of the New World Order. You know, it's kind of shifted, I think, in a way that I feel like when we come through whatever this next process is, we're going to be in a situation where the timelines are very different than they've been in the prior TSEP cycles.
Yeah, so the number of projects have grown. That's, you know, kind of increased the time it takes to put projects through the process. Each phase is its own closeout. So PIA funding is in place, you know, from 1 to 4 years, 2 to 4 is what I used earlier. So the PIA dollars, you know, depends on the size of the project, how long that project takes. 2 to 4 years, that funding is closed out, and that agreement and work order internally all closed out before the next phase happens. Environmental study is much the same thing, roughly a 2 to 4 year, depends on the size of the project, the complexity of the environmental work, etc. And then it is closed out before the next thing comes in, you know, which is the tendering the offer and collecting the security. And
Thanks.
Each one of those really function as hop-off points for customers. Customers had a lot of comments about the ability to hop off to minimize costs. Those are the hop-off points. If you don't want to fund the environmental study, you don't. TSR is removed from the queue. You've got to hop off.
And you forfeit the money that Bonneville spent on the time, right? I mean, you guys do a billing true up, and so if you asked for $1 million and you spent 500,000 of it, that's just gone, right, for the customer. Just skin in the game wise, right?
No. So we do a true up, and we will credit or charge depending on what actuals are. So if we collected $1 million and actuals was 500,000, we would refund 500,000 on a pro rata share basis.
Right.
You know, we collected on a pro rata share basis, we refund on a pro rata share basis.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I think that's helpful too, as to like everybody, the current process, I guess my point is, has a lot of skin in the game along the way. Each one of those steps, you are ponying up money to continue further. And then I guess where the final part of this kind of question and discussion is, you know, so how long is that money sitting there? So in a situation where the plan of service, like for example, in the last TSEP, you know, request from John Day, counterflow to Northwest Market Hub Mid-C, the plan of service was north of Pearl 500, Hood River, north of Marion number 1, north of Marion number 2, north of Grizzly 500, third-party systems, another third-party systems. So each, you know, some of those are like 5-10 year projects. what's the earliest, let's say, if those are a 3-year project, a 5-year project, an 8-year project, and a 10-year project, what's the earliest somebody's going to get a confirmed offer of service, and how long, in this example of if that's $12 million, is that money sitting there?
Thanks, Jake. I think at this point, if there's any more that you would like to share with other customers, that the next week's customer-led workshop will be an excellent venue for you to do that. And I'd like to move us on to the next part of the agenda, which is the pivot to a 212 proceeding. Katie?
Just
Great.
to clarify and
Thank
close
you.
that out, though, that 12 plus $6 million would be sitting there, subject to how much Bonneville spends for that whole 10 years in that situation, right?
Yeah.
No,
And the current state.
2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But if the project's
When the
took 5
scoping's over, we close it out.
And that's the
But if
point
the
where
plan of
we
service
have
was a 10-year, 500 kV
refunded.
project, if the plan of service was a 10-year,
Jake,
500
I
kV
think
project,
if you want to discuss this, you can discuss it next week in the customer-led workshop. We're going to move on this to the next topic.
can you confirm that that's correct? If it's, I think it's a pretty important clarification. It's not 2 to 4 years if the project takes 10 years to.
Scoping funds are in place for the time it takes to do scoping activities. Environmental funds are in place for the time it takes to do environmental activities. The letter of credit is in place for the time it takes to construct the project and the other related projects for the service to go, for the long-term firm request to go into service.
And it would be repealed back or dropped back based on the amount of service taken over generally a period of 5 years.
And letter of credits reduced over time as services taken and paid for. But I think we're talking on the dollars, and in our worldview, the dollars are in the buckets. In the if you look at the Sept BP and you look at the phases, the dollars are for each phase, and each phase closes out before new dollars are collected. It's not the same money over and over.
Abby,
Yes.
we are ready to move forward.
Yes, we're ready to move forward on
Okay, great.
the tariff process. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you for putting the slide up. Okay, so this, first of all, thank you to the team for current state. I think that was great. Content helps level set as we move this pivot into the tariff proceeding process. So we have said this up front, Mike said this, but we want to again reiterate that we appreciate the engagement and feedback we've received to date for the GAT initiative. Everyone's been really collaborative, really helpful. Tremendous amount of comments that you've provided both at the workshops and in writing. So thank you for that ahead of time going into this. From that feedback, both during the workshops and in those comments, we heard a recognition of a need for change. There was some consensus, quite a bit of consensus around elements of the staff's proposal today. But in addition to that, we also received many requests for more engagement and information from the GAT team in order to move forward. Customers have also said that they want additional data and analysis. They've got questions about impacts of the proposals that we've had today. We also saw both verbally and in writing concerns about how staff's proposals align with our current tariffs, impacts to our existing products, services, contractual rights, and then alignment with other BPA initiatives such as day-ahead markets. In consideration of these concerns, particularly the need for additional engagement and process, we are making a shift for GAT towards conducting a tariff proceeding process. Our intention is to build off proposals that staff have already shared to date with you over the summer and just provide additional time for additional consideration of your comments, feedback, and questions. The shift to the proceeding will address concerns we've heard around the need for additional engagement and process. We also want to recognize that some of you may have concerns about the schedule with this approach versus the schedule that we had previously shared. We believe that there are areas where we can reach consensus and then other areas where we're going to need more dialogue. Through the process, we're optimistic we can come together through this proceeding. We are also very open to discussing our proposals about the process with you in upcoming workshops or individually. You're welcome to reach out to the AEs or through text forum to share that feedback with us following the meeting today. And with that, I am going to open to questions before we move forward.
Henry?
Thank you. This is Henry Tillman with NIPSI and Renewable Northwest. And Katie, I think NIPSI's primary interest in having a sort of a more rapid process for part of this reform was to allow Bonneville to begin processing redirect requests, long-term firm redirect requests. Does Bonneville have any thoughts about how we might be able to resume processing those while we develop a tariff revision?
I know it's something the long-term firm redirects requests, if we can continue processing those. Just reiterating the question, Henry.
Sorry, Henry, I was multitasking. This is Abby. So we have heard from several of you that trying to find a way to process redirects again is desirable. It would be helpful to us to hear from you guys what sorts of features or characteristics of those redirects. So for example, we've heard suggestions like allow the de minimis impact redirects to go through. Because we are already allowing redirects through that have no impact on the system, not just minimal, but no impact. They either release capacity entirely or they create a counterflow. We are continuing to process those at this time. We have not been allowing de minimis redirects or other small impacts through. The belief there on our part being that, and this is a silly analogy, but dimes and nickels can add up. And if we created an opening, the concern would be that we would see a rush to activity in the redirect market that would result in those nickels and dime impacts adding up significantly. And at the other end of this process, we'll have granted service that we wish we hadn't done because we need it for another purpose that we'll negotiate through the 212 proceeding. So if there are elements or features of a redirect that you would like to see us open up to, with that background about what our concern is, if you could state like how large an impact would you deem would be acceptable, or what sorts of rules might we allow some through but not others? That would be helpful feedback for us.
Thank you, Abby. That's helpful, and I will I'll meet with various members and try to pull that information together for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry.
Steve? Steve Lincoln? You should be off mute.
You can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Earlier in the process, when we were still considering this like a business practice change, BPA was able to sort of spitball what timeline might be required to apply updated policies and criteria to the existing queue, and then start processing requests that have landed. What was it, that cutoff since August 15th of 2024? I'm assuming that those timelines, now that we're transitioning to a tariff process, should be scrapped, and that there's probably a new timeline that BPA is working on, so people can have an idea of when the paused TSRs could get moving again. Is that correct? And have you guys started thinking about that timeline?
The first part of the previous timeline no longer being valid, yes. The second question, will we be able to demonstrate when we will be able to start processing, is a harder, it depends. We will be we have been putting together a schedule of the proposed proceeding workshop and how that would move into the formal proceeding that we hope to share in the very near future. And when we would be able to start processing is very dependent on how that proceeding goes. The timeline, I think, as most folks are aware, it can fluctuate depending on that. It's not a perfect, great answer, but I think we'll just have to figure that out as we go along and the timeline becomes more clear. I'm not sure if that fully answers it for you, Steve.
No, that was close, Katie, and I appreciate that. That the last part of this question is, does Bonneville anticipate using the GAT page to move through this tariff process, or we're going to should we stay tuned for like a new venue?
I believe Melanie Versoff might be on the phone, who helps run our tariff process. And my understanding is we will pivot over to a standard tariff site. So we'll probably, or I believe we will, have like a TC 27 site. But we'll be working on that. And when we make that change, we'll fully announce it.
Understood. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, Melanie confirmed.
Okay, Melanie confirmed that for me. Thank you, Melanie. And we would make sure that all of the content that exists right now for GAT that we're linking so that there's full crosswalks between and we won't lose anything.
All right, you good, Steve?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Jake, you
Thanks.
are off mute.
Thank you. I guess follow-ups to both Henry and Steve's comments. And I guess I'll start with the redirect one. I mean, I think we're certainly in the camp of folks that think that there's something possible there. I think the answer back makes a lot of sense. I guess our hope that would be to look for some kind of low-hanging fruit, sort of sequential approach that could be, considered, like certain scenarios. For example, if you were redirecting on a radial line from one point on the radial line, up to the next one, then you're really just bumping up the same thing. There's not really material impacts. The de minimis thing, but also, to your point of how many nickels and dimes do you collect, I think, systematically engaging to go through kind of the current queue order, because there are a lot of requests already out there, to work through kind of where you think you can get to, just so you do what you do believe you can do, because it was probably a bit more. But I think it seems like there's probably a finite set of scenarios that you guys could identify, or we could work to, to identify a few cases. If Portland's trying to redirect from the north end of the system to the south end of the system, or things like that, there should be a few cases that are more actionable. Second, on Steve's bigger question about the timeline, I guess first, it feels like that before we get into the formality of tariff process, that there is some more discussion needed to kind of have the space to examine issues properly and have a healthy discussion. I mean, this type of slide that you just gave, like, there's a bunch of cases and scenarios I think that are important to probably be doing in a non-litigated environment for people to understand the options, including discussion of what we know from prior studies, and so forth, to lay better foundations to make that more productive, and maybe which things should or shouldn't be in there. So I think our request would be for a little bit more space before we decide to kick that off, and including, to the heart of Steve's question, like, when are we going to start studying again? I guess our big concern overall here is it doesn't seem like Bonneville should have to stop processing under the current rules in order to run another study. The last study studied 15 gigawatts. It triggered essentially universal upgrades everywhere for almost all of the requests. And, I think to BPA's credit, like, I agree with the description earlier. You guys turned up the knob time after time. You ran really good studies. You identified results. And you actually did a lot of the hard work last time identifying all the builds the region needs. The region has also now adopted those builds, right? They're evolving grid projects, most of those things. So what we haven't had is a study since you did the hard work of identifying that, and we know you can process at least 15 gigawatts because you've already done it, and we've heard numbers from 20 to 25 from you guys that you could study in a single pass. As I feel like we should have a candid discussion, and we would recommend go ahead and process the first 15 gig of the current queue without waiting and running a whole litigated process, which could take a long time and is probably pretty contentious, because we actually know right now that you can process at least 15 or 20 gigawatts more. And we also know that we haven't done a new study that's based on those upgrades, where all of those upgrades have essentially been, socialized by the system and take an approach there. And so it seems like we have some ability to move forward, and ideally BPA could also commit to covering a certain minimum amount they felt comfortable, 15 or 20 gigawatts, and then turn the knob up as far as they thought the already identified upgrades would support, to produce kind of the biggest report that they could. But it does seem like, there's a possibility to move forward. And candidly, the biggest thing that I want to highlight is with all of this is the real issue is the PIA funding. Like the way the process works now, a lot of the proposals have been about turning up the deposits and cost amounts for everybody. But we know from the last study that when everybody got those results, that are going to be the same results we get again. There's the same requests to filed back in, John data everywhere, et cetera, that all of the major players in the region faced with multi-million-dollar PIA deposits walked away. And I don't think we should be assuming that everybody's going to do something different this time. And I'm concerned Bonneville is going to go through a giant process that says we weren't going to ask for even more money on upgrades that are generally socialized broadly across the whole system, benefiting almost everything everywhere. And we're going to get to the end of this study, and BPA is going to say, here's a lot of money, and nobody's going to give it to them. And we're just going to be in the same exact place we finished the last study, but it's going to be 2 or 3 years from now. And I think that's worth spending some time to talk about up front before we do this, because ultimately, if BPA is already committed to evolving grid funding of all the capex of that, then I think we should be talking about an approach using the old process that's asking for 10% of the PIA amounts instead of 100, much less 200%, and just proceeding towards what we already know works. Because again, Bonneville already did the great work of identifying all the upgrades we need, and I think we can get a lot of results published.
So I think a couple things here. The first part I'll address is just the ability for us to have collaboration and ongoing dialogue about the issues and how we frame up solution sets for that. And it also builds on, Tatiana, thank you for your question in the chat. You got some answers here. As we move into the pre-proceeding workshop, we absolutely have the ability to continue to have that we won't move into ex parte. So still, and I would say more time, not still, but additional time for us to all have this collaboration as part of the proceeding workshop. And then I'm also going to have Abby chime in here about the study, the current state.
Yeah, so it is fair to say that the last, the 23 TSEP that we were able to successfully complete, it did take us 2 years rather than the 1 year that was estimated at 17 gigawatts. And so, Jake, your point is well made. We understand that is something that we are capable of. However, at this point, if we were to attempt to continue to process requests, what we are expecting is that what comes out the other end is a series of plans of service that are either too large, too expensive, and we'll continue to see the behavior that we saw in this 23 TSEP, where a large portion of our queue drops away because the plans of service are too expensive. So it feels like a waste of our time and our effort, especially when we are relatively resource constrained in our ability to perform these sorts of studies. We are wanting to spend our slings and arrows on the work that is the most effective for us. And our assessment at this point is that conducting the largest study we think we could will not result in actionable results at the other end.
I think this is the healthy conversation that needs to occur, because I think that is the point. But can we deconstruct that a little bit? Because I think what the last study showed is anywhere you requested service from the coast to Portland or mid-sea, you triggered the Schultz Olympia project, right? Everything was everywhere. So if the next incremental megawatt on almost everything requires half dozen to a dozen major projects, I mean, that is what the region needs. And I'm a little concerned that what I hear you saying is, it feels like the region is saying, the market is saying, we do need all these wires. The studies are saying everything's maxed out, so we got to build a bunch of stuff everywhere. But Bonneville's sort of saying, well, we can't build all this stuff that everybody needs, so we want to adopt policies to shrink everything back to a small enough set that it doesn't need all the upgrades that we all need. But we do need
That is
them.
not what I'm saying.
I'm not.
What I do want to, yeah, I do want to clarify, because you're saying that's what I've said, and I'm not intending to
That's how
say
it
that. So I
feels.
just want to
I'm not.
clarify. Yeah, appreciate that. So I'll clarify.
Yeah.
Our last successful TSEP, the 23 TSEP, resulted in plans of service that we had when offered the next stage agreements, which were the PIAs, we had a vast portion of requesters drop away. And the cited reasons were that those projects were too expensive for them to proceed with. So this isn't a Bonneville assessment that we can't afford to build these. It's that the region is telling us they can't afford these.
Can we dig into that though a little bit more? Because I think this is why I was kind of asking.
So Jake, hey, Jake, I apologize for interrupting. This is Sean. Abby, guys, can we maybe get through the announcement slides first and then do any deep dives at the end when we maybe can ensure that we have all the clarifications on this announcement and the process out of the way? We've got some other hands raised, and we'd just like to get through these clarifications of the process and the announcement before we do any deep dives. Is that okay?
That works for me.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess how much space we need for what, I think, relates to kind of process discussion, but happy to circle back in a second. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate that. Chris Allen, you are alphabetically next.
Thank you. Chris Allen, PGC Power. I wanted to just touch on the first bullet of this slide and try to get an understanding of what I should expect as sort of a customer and an entity that has been engaging in this process for quite some time, even before we called GATT. So as we move into a tariff proceeding, and Bonneville's intention is to provide more engagement process that would address concerns or comments that have been raised. How far back in time does Bonneville think that we're going to go in terms of collecting comments that have been submitted? Because I think there are a number of comments that were submitted early in this process from NT customers that were still not maybe fully receiving responses, or they say, reference the GATT process or other processes for, information. So I'm just trying to figure out, are we going to go back and address those like one at a time through this process once it gets into a tariff proceeding? So anyways, I'll stop there and let you respond.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's a few different layers of it. So I guess the first piece of it is all the comments that we've received to date. The teams have been utilizing those in the proposals that they have put together and previously presented. So I just think overarchingly, everything that we have heard and seen has been incorporated. As far as how we have responded publicly to those things in writing, the GATT specific workshop, there are 2 remaining steps. That's actually my next step slide that will be published here very shortly. And then Erin, our NITS program manager, is in the room. And so I'm going to have her speak to the NITS one specifically.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chris. So on Tuesday, we actually sent out a tech form that basically responded to all of the comments that we have received at the 520 workshop that was at the time still labeled the NITS access to transmission capacity. I think I got my official name still right there. So we responded to all of those comments, and if you read the beginning section of that, we went through and we looked at all of the comments that we received in 2024 timeframe up until that 520 workshop. And we kind of said, looking at the resource constraint we have internally, kind of like the length of time that has happened between when those comments were sent in and the content of those comments, which what we found is most of the comments
that we received really set us up pretty well to, I guess I would say, showcase the need and drive that we needed to move into this gap process. So we kind of determined for any of the stuff that you guys had, customers had provided up until that 520 workshop, we aren't going to specifically line by line be going through, going through and responding to those, but it really did help inform BPA and say, hey, guess what? There is a real need for gaps.
I will then add on to, I think it was the first part of your question or statement around the first bullet. When we have the kickoff meeting, which is likely to be scheduled in October, is the plan right now. We will get that out as soon as possible to you. We will provide the timeline. We will provide an overview of the process itself, what to expect of the proceeding, as we do in every other tariff proceeding. So you'll see a lot more detailed information about what to expect, how do we incorporate customer comments through each step of that process. So you'll be receiving significantly more information about the process at that kickoff workshop.
And so maybe I can pull the thread just a little bit longer, and I appreciate both your and Aaron's responses. If there's something that's important that we believe that we just really need to receive a direct response from Bonneville, it sounds like this tariff process would allow for perhaps a resubmission of prior comments such that Bonneville will then provide a direct response. Is that fair to state?
I'm going to let others jump in here, but I believe so long as it's in the scope.
Yeah, hi, this is Rolf Kukre, the Bonneville Office of General Counsel, Chris. Yes, if there are questions or concerns you feel haven't been addressed, please resubmit them and we'll do our best to address them in the upcoming process we're going to conduct.
I also saw there was sorry, it's a little hard to follow the chat while listening and talking, but I believe there was something about scope as well. And that's something we'll talk about on the kickoff as well, as what is the scope, what's all included in the tariff proceeding that we're discussing.
Is that helpful, Chris?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right. All right,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
All right. Chris Jones, you are next.
Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. This is Chris Jones, and are you?
Yep. Confirmed.
I think you might have just answered this. I had a similar question about scope. I wanted to just see if you could confirm that, nothing that has been proposed through GATT is still slated to be implemented pursuant to the original timeline of November. There isn't a single proposal that you're looking to not include in the 212 process. And I guess part two of that is, does the 212 process include the future state stuff as well in proactive planning?
So I don't want to give the wrong answers, Chris. I'll feel like not the best answer, but I think in general that the first part of what you asked is correct. We're still working through that, and we'll be more formalized what that scope is. The intention is that it would not include the future state right now. It would be what we have been talking about for the transition to the future state. But that's where we need to provide you with more details at that workshop. Did you have a
completely agree? I think that's we will clarify the scope in the kickoff workshop, which we estimate to occur in October sometime.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
And I acknowledge and apologize that it's not as much information as we would like to be able to share, but as you guys know, we're trying to shift and move as quickly as possible. So we are trying to get as much of that out and clarify as quickly as we can to you.
Is there anything else, Katie, that we want to share before we keep opening up to questions, or just keep questions at this point?
I think, let me talk about the next steps really quickly.
Okay.
Let's wrap
All
that
right.
up and then we can do that.
All right.
This is pretty quick.
And
So
then we'll get back to the hands raised. So Jake, we see you there, but we want to get through this slide and then we can open it up for more questions.
okay, so the first piece is we are still intending to have the customer-led workshop next week, acknowledging that that would be happening before we kick off the pre-proceeding workshops. But we know that there's a lot of really valuable information that customers have already been preparing, and we want to continue with this because we think it's a great use of everybody's time. That being said, with what we have shared today, if any of the customers who have already requested time on the 10th, if you are wanting to hold that time and come back and give your presentations at a later workshop, or if you just want to pivot the agenda item, we're very flexible on either of those options. So just give us an email to your AE Tech Forum, and we can accommodate that. So just wanted to share that, but we are intending on having that meeting on the 10th. As of right now, we have 8 customers that have requested time on the agenda. It is full. So we have a full agenda from, gosh, I believe it was 9 to 3:30, Sean?
Correct.
We are finalizing that agenda right now. Hope to get that out tomorrow, I believe is the plan.
Right. So
To get
if
the
you
agenda
have
out
a
tomorrow.
response to Katie's earlier query on wanting to pivot, please let us know maybe by noon tomorrow.
Yeah,
so that we can
great.
affect change. Thanks.
So you'll see that for anybody that is presenting, this will come out in the Tech Forum, but a reminder that materials need to be to us by the 8th so that we can get those posted and make sure that folks have a chance to see those. And then the coming soon section, as I noted before, we are preparing responses right now to the July 9th and 10th, and then the July 29th and 30th workshops. The teams have been utilizing that content. Thank you again. And our plan is to get those responses out prior to that kickoff workshop that's being scheduled right now for October. Additionally, that we, and it actually says the answer to the question that came up earlier, we are going to have the TC27 tariff proceeding webpage, and that will be added. That and the workshops will be added to the agency calendar. And then once we have all of these things confirmed, we will get a Tech Forum out as soon as possible on that schedule and the new site. Okay, I'm going to look around my cohorts. Did we miss anything on the next steps? Nope. Okay, then I think we can go see if we missed any questions.
All right. Let's see here. Don had a question there in the chat.
I don't think that's a question.
Okay. Oh, yeah, comment. Thank you, Don. We can go back to the phone. And Jake, you're back off mute. Go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, I guess Don and David Meyer also kind of weighed in. So like, I think welcome others to kind of join some of this discussion. But you know, on the process, I guess overall, it feels like there should be their own further just discussion of how this is going to be scoped and broke out. I feel like there was so much piled into this that it definitely creates a number of issues. I also feel like some robust space should be made for discussing before BPA proceeds down this path, you know, what our actual options are to keep going to some extent now and talk about that. So, and I guess circling back to my comments a minute ago, you know, I think I don't feel like some of the important questions have necessarily been asked here. And I think, I'm not sure if that was Abby or who was, you know, kind of responding when we were discussing it earlier, because I see her on one thing and then the voice is coming through a different one. But the, you know, like I'm not sure that, you know, the conclusion Bonneville reached from the results of the last study were necessarily the right ones. And, you know, we did attempt to have some discussions with BPA management at the time, and Newsun predicted, you know, 3 or 6 months in advance of that this was what was going to happen. But I think, you know, it's a little more complicated than the sort of assertion that nobody wanted it or nobody, and I'm simplifying a bit here, so please, nobody at Bonneville, please, you know, feel offended here, but I'm trying to kind of get to the heart of like, kind of the gist of why we're going down this really big U-turn in process on something that may not be broken, or it may be that a different knob needs to be focused on. Because I think what I read in that study was we've reached this point where we need all of these upgrades. It's very clear that they're needed almost anywhere you're going. And BPA has correctly, to your credit, like seriously, the Evolving Grid program has been stood up, it's been launched. You've said, hey, we're going to build these things. We have a list of 12.5 great projects. They're well validated by the market need. There's a strong business case. Everybody does need them, right? What we got to at the end of that process was a bunch of people requesting stuff that were then faced with BPA's policy was to confirm you want this stuff, you need to give us, it was probably a couple $100 million across 20 customers. And there's a difference between being asked to pony up $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, $50 million on 30 days notice or whatever it is, right? Against the backdrop of a project that could take 10 or 20 years, and that money may be sitting there for 5 or 10 or 20 years, depending on what it is, and having to make that decision on a dime versus saying like, we don't want that. And I think that I think it's worth querying customers and talking about this, because I think a lot of the people in that situation, I know we would have been different if you'd said, well, here's 10% of that amount. We got, tens of millions of dollars towards ours. We would have still funded millions of dollars and put some skin in there and said, hey, we're willing to wait. We do need that. That is what we think we need. And that would have gotten a different answer. And I think the answer you would have gotten from the region would have been different. And I'm concerned, I guess the other dichotomy that I'm seeing here is BPA is rightfully agreeing they're going to build all this stuff. But the process right now is just basically saying, but you guys need to pay all the engineering dollars, or you can't request some of a piece of the stuff we're going to build anyways. And so really the question of like, who is socializing those costs how, which seem like they're overwhelmingly already decided to be socialized, versus putting it back on the customers as a group to pony up hundreds of millions of dollars of engineering dollars to proceed with the ability to request the service for the stuff you're going to build anyways. Because I think some small changes in policy would result in a very different response from the region for you guys to have people sign up and say, hey, yeah, I do want that if it's 5, 10, 15 years from now. And here's 10% of the PIA estimate that you guys would have done before, or something different that allows us to confirm and validate and build your business case and maybe some contribution. But right now I feel like we're on this path that's going to lead to either nothing comes out at the end because it's turning up the knob so high that it's worse than last time in terms of how customers respond to that. And that doesn't help your business case and accelerate the projects, or so it sort of reaches another wrong conclusion, and maybe we don't have to reinvent the entire thing. I mean, you guys have a good study process, and I think it's worth some time to talk about what could we look at differently here that might get us where we really want to go, because I think we all want the upgrades, and it's going to take time. So you also don't want to drive everybody away.
Hi, Jake. This is Rahul and Bonneville Power, Office of General Counsel. Thank you for the comments and the questions. Your comment, the question, and the other feedback we heard are the reason why we're shifting to more formal process, and we're going to have more engagement on these issues. So I think you've heard from us today. We've been trying to reinforce the problem, and we've tried to provide some information today on the status quo. We intend to build off the work we did this summer in the upcoming pre-proceeding workshops, and we will have these discussions, and you will have an opportunity, and others will have an opportunity in next week's customer-led workshop, and then when we kick off the workshops to have more discussions around this. We're not foreclosing anything, we're willing to listen and hear, but I do want to reinforce, we have some concerns. We've tried to share those today, and I think we have some disagreements here, and we need to spend some time talking about it, and we're not going to resolve that right now. So let's continue to have this conversation as we pivot into more workshops before the tariff proceeding.
I also want to reinforce, Jake. This is Abby. Sorry for not clarifying that earlier.
Okay.
We do not necessarily disagree with you. However, We are, so, since the 23 TSEP, which you're right, maybe at the time, had we had the foresight to look into the future and predict what was coming, we perhaps could have turned knobs and dials back then to arrive at a different outcome once the plans of service came out the other end of those studies. I don't have a time machine, so I can't address that. But the simple fact of the matter is, so we learned a lot in the 23 TSEP, and as we were gearing up for the 25 TSEP, the queue blossomed like we had not projected or dared fear would happen. So I hear that you are acknowledging the desire that, okay, if 65 gigawatts is too big to study at once, do it in the biggest batches you can. One thing I just want to acknowledge, so we've explained the reasons why a third-party study of a cluster study for Bonneville is not likely to be terribly effective for us at this point, a customer-conducted study. But another element that I want everyone to be just keeping in the back of your minds, and I don't think that we can engage terribly meaningfully on this. I'm going to get my hand slapped later for even mentioning this, but I want to reinforce for everybody that what happened in this last year at Bonneville is a significantly different resource stack than we had in our last very challenging TSEP for us to conclude. It took us twice as long, and we had more staff back then. So I appreciate that you're wanting to lean in and make sure that you understand our problem statement and that you want to help us make sure that we are trying to tackle the right problem. But I also want to reinforce Bonneville is the only party at this point that can do this study, and we are telling you we cannot do this study.
Okay, so pause there, and Jake, I'm going to take you off, put you back on mute, but feel free to raise your hand. But I just, with that conversation kind of pause, I want to give somebody else a chance to ask a question.
Thank you.
Okay. Chris Stolz, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is Chris Stoltz from Pine Gate Renewables. I have a two-part question. First part being, given this announcement to move to the tariff proceeding, is there any opportunity or any thoughts of Bonneville if there were components of what was proposed in the most recent business practices that still may be able to be implemented in some sort of business practice here while the tariff proceedings begin and go through its course of completion? I'm most interested in interim service and if there are still ways to enable potential requests on an interim basis that otherwise now might be waiting for a full tariff completion to even start their ability to proceed forth.
Hi, Chris. This is Rahul again. I think we need to start with laying out our scope and the schedule. We've heard from a lot of customers and support for the proposals and ideas and concepts we laid out this summer. And for us to move quickly, we heard also feedback from customers, some of the same entities, concerns and questions and wanting more analysis and data, including about proposals around interim service. So I think we do need more discussion first. And that's what the process for shifting to a tariff proceeding will offer us. Maybe out of the pre-proceeding workshops, we can come up with solutions. I just also want to reinforce, we did hear a lot of support and consensus around a lot of the ideas we're putting out there, but a lot of questions as well. And so our hope, we're optimistic that having more engagement, having more time, having a clearer direction in where we're going, if we had to with a tariff proceeding process, that maybe we will be able to come together and have more consensus around certain areas, and then maybe there are possibilities for moving faster on certain proposals. But at this time, we're going to have to go through and have some discussions and have some additional workshops. I think that's a pretty uniform request from a lot of customers.
No, thank you for that response. And then my second question is probably just more informative. for myself, but given the additional time here to proceed with the tariff proceedings for 2023 TSEP requests, are the potential reevaluations for conditional firm service paused as part of the reform measures, or would that still, in theory, be ongoing if system conditions or changes warranted a potential issuance of conditional firm service for a request?
Sorry, you have to repeat that.
Oh, yeah.
Can the question be repeated?
Hey, Chris, sorry. Can you repeat the question around the
Yeah,
conditional
basically,
firm?
like my understanding, according to the current TSEP process, is conditional firm service can be periodically reviewed and potentially awarded if certain system conditions, et cetera, change. And I just wanted to confirm if that is considered a part of this, GAT reform pause, or if that is something that it could still be ongoing in a 23 TSEP request, for example, could potentially be issued conditional firm service if system conditions changed and that was warranted to be done.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I have to get back to you on that for things pre-23. I believe in the pause that we were, I'd have to get back to you on that. I will say at this point in time, there aren't any unmade service offers in the studied space, but we do periodically review review the TSRs to see if it is possible to give CF service.
And Chris, just to confirm, you're talking about a TSR that was studied in the 23 cluster study.
Yeah, in this example, that's correct. So, like, my understanding is there aren't any requests that were able to receive conditional firm service, even if they have a TSA agreement, are going through their PEAs, ESAs, et cetera. So, if that's not paused and can continue to be reviewed and evaluated, that might, address some of my previous questions regarding interim service. But we were most certainly interested in the interim service uh, product as a way to, reopen that door and work towards a solution to help enable transmission service earlier to meet our needs on our projects. So if that's going to continue to be delayed, I kind of potentially view this as another way to work with Bonneville to work towards that solution. But if that's also on pause, I think our comments related to how we can approach interim service may be different.
Yeah, do you think you could reach out to me specifically and then we could have a better conversation around that?
Yeah,
Yeah, of
Chris,
course.
just go ahead and send that into Tech Forum. We'll make sure it gets over to Tasha.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much.
Then we've got you queued up for the customer-led discussion next week, so maybe we'll have a response by then.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. All right, moving on, Chris Jones with NRU.
Hey again, Chris Jones, NRU. And maybe you answered this in my last question. I'm not sure. Sorry if you did. But again, a little bit on scope. I wanted just to confirm. So what I thought I heard was that the 212 process would basically cover all the transitional elements of GAT, but wasn't, I think, anticipated to include the future state items. And so assuming that that's true, is BPA planning to continue holding discussions on the future state elements through the fall, or are those discussions sort of
on pause now as well, pending the 212 process. Just recognizing that I think the September workshop was originally supposed to focus on future state elements.
So that's part of what we're working through right now, Chris. Because we acknowledge there are elements of the future state that we likely want to have some conversation about, even if they're not part of the scope. So we're trying to figure out how do we do that, over what time frame. So I think we're still open to suggestions in that space, but that's part of the scoping step that we're working through. Abby, do you want to, anything else? Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Jake, you are off mute.
Thanks.
Jake? Okay.
Yeah, hi. So I guess kind of following up on some of that discussion, I guess I'll reiterate. I feel like there's some more information gathering that would be helpful before launching into the next phase. And some of it is, like you guys just responded to some things and said, like, we're planning on moving forward with a bunch of the gap proposals we already put forward. Like some of those proposals, for example, were offering sort of take it or leave it, or you're out of the queue, 2-year reassessment stuff, and I just say, like, I think there's a lot of ideas that Bonneville threw out there that could have maybe been good, but it really interacts with a lot of commercial issues. Like, I think for most project developers, 2-year reassessment isn't financeable for new generation, and it's not reliable probably for an LSE to depend on for 20 years. And there's issues about what happens to people being removed from the queue if they didn't accept an offer and things like that. So, that's an example of, I don't think Bonneville has done the homework of reaching out to us as a community offline and, having some surveys and sort of focus group discussions or something on, like, was that actually useful to you? Because I think that's one
So
where when we
Jake,
talk to people.
I just want to clarify the really quickly, because from what you just said made me think that I wasn't clear in what I was sharing for where we're headed. So again, we'll share the details of what the 212 process looks like and what the pre-proceeding looks like. But we will be utilizing the process that we would typically utilize, which would be our 6-step process. And we would intend to start with step 1, going back to the problem statement and working our way through that. That includes, and I think it's step 4 is the alternatives. And then we would get to the actual staff leaning. So we intend to go back in time, go through that whole rigorous process, analysis, everything, to include looking at what are all the alternatives, make sure that we're getting feedback on alternatives, have opportunity for customers to have more customer-led workshops, make sure that we're considering things they want us to consider in alternatives, and going through that robust analysis. So I apologize, I could have been clearer about that when I talked about what that looks like moving into that. So I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that we're skipping straight to a staff proposal and going into the formal proceeding. That is not the intent. The intent is that we would start, right at the beginning, pre-proceeding workshops, step 1 of that, and conduct that thorough engagement. So I think everything you're saying fits in what we're talking about, and that acknowledgement and responsiveness to the feedback we've received that there needs to be more time for that in-depth conversation. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. Thank you for interrupting me there, so I didn't go too far with that. It does feel like there could be a couple of a little bit more gathering of information, exploring a few things before we hit that point. But that is a really appreciated. And I guess there's a few versions of those ideas, but I really want to highlight back to that, question I was highlighting earlier, which is, I think the base case of what we've been looking at is, let's turn up the knob even higher on how much money and how financially challenging it is. And I think it'd be good to kind of revisit that and have some discussions about those dynamics. They're not all intuitive, right? I think a lot of times in these discussions,
Yeah,
it's
that's
okay,
the
yeah,
intention of moving into a 212 proceeding, is to give us time to have those conversations.
Yes.
Absolutely.
yeah, great. Well, we appreciate that.
All right, thanks, Jake. Next up, we have Scott.
Yeah, let's
Scott,
see.
a little bit of feedback. Okay, better.
How about now? Can you hear me?
That's better. Thank you, Scott.
Let's see if I can't get this to work. Yeah, so my question is, I've asked this at a variety of, my name's Scott Levy, I'm bluefish.org. I've been going to the Northwest Council's RAC and SAC meetings. And the latest that we saw last week, I guess, was there's going to be a lot of storage, standalone storage in a reliable future grid. Are these studies that Bonneville's undertaking, are they considering a large amount of storage on them? The RAC and SAC in the council, we don't look at where they should be located, but it seems that the BPA modeling could look and see that certain places would benefit greatly with storage, but I'm not so sure that storage is even in these models.
Sorry, we're thinking about the response to that real quick.
Hey, this is Alex, BBA. We can circle back to that. That would require us to do a little research. I can say yes, there is storage in the studies, but I can't say off the top of my head exactly how much. So we need a little time for that.
Okay, great, because I'm sure that a lot of the difficulties of getting people on the grid would be, hugely benefited by having the amount of storage that council's power, what we're seeing is needed. It's going to be a far more reliable grid. So maybe you could be talking to John Ollis and people over there at council to see how much that they're forecasting, and then build that into your models. Places like around Portland obviously would benefit greatly. So thanks for looking into that.
Welcome. Thanks, Scott. No other questions at this time. Nothing in the chat other than, I guess, Sydney had a comment, but that is just a comment at this point. Thank you, Sydney. David, okay, see you there. And you should be off mute now, David.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all the discussions and stuff. That's very helpful. I was curious what BPA's thoughts were with respect to, the significant changes between baseload generation to, intermittent resources and the impact that has on the cluster study process. The going from, 1 megawatt of baseload generation to potentially 4 megawatts of equivalent wind, exacerbates the whole TSEP process and results in, significant amounts of nameplate TSRs being studied for resources that won't necessarily flow coincidentally. So I'd be curious on your perspectives.
So I'll wade in. This is Abby Knoll. Again, disclaimer, I am not a study engineer or any kind of engineer at all. But there are a number of them in the room with me. They can clarify. So one thing to keep in mind is that Bonneville's ethic for conducting commercial studies has always been that regardless of what resource is in place at the point of interconnection or the point of point of receipt, when initially requested, that service is fungible, it's redirectable, it's reassignable, it can be used in a variety of ways. And so if you're securing and paying for 100 megawatts from, say, for example, a wind resource, but at some point that resource, runs its lifespan and it's retiring, and you want to reassign that service to a solar farm or some other sort of base load generation, you are perfectly able to do that. And so when we're granting transmission service rights, we are being thoughtful of how those rights will be used now and in perpetuity, is assuming that the service is going to be offered renewal or rollover rights. So while it's fair to acknowledge that the system will always operate, acknowledging lower capacity factors and whatnot, when we're doing commercial studies to grant service, we are acknowledging that we have to temper how much of that reality we use, because those transmission rights can be used in a variety of ways that we cannot control.
I greatly appreciate that clarity. That's something I tend to not think about on the far end of this. But one thought though is, the Pacific Northwest is in a pretty odd area where, solar is not really good on the west side of the Cascades. There's no more hydro. The only real resources are, wind to meet our needs. And, with wind's low capacity factor, I guess if you extrapolate this out to a lot of 2050 goals for the different utilities, I see a lot of transmission potentially needed to be built that will have very low utilization, and I think that's going to be complex for ratepayers to be paid for, and for local governments to support.
Thank you for that comment, David. Any other response, David? Nope. All right. Jake.
Yeah, just following up on Abby's response there, I think that's really important, and I agree with everything she said. And I don't, this process is always interesting because, there's been an influx of a lot of people to this area that haven't maybe thought about things like redirectability of transmission and so forth. And I think a lot of the primary discussion around this has been driven by generator developers trying to be responsive to RFPs and things like that in a very kind of linear point-to-point fixed universe. And a lot of, I think, Bonneville's initial proposals, reflect that sort of driving comment basis. But that part of flexibility is really important, and it doesn't really, for the power traders on the call, right, they're redirecting stuff all over the system all the time, and there's a very plastic nature. And part of the transmission system as well is that, folks like us and other people over the decades before that we've learned from or seen have found parts of the system that exist that are actually more usable. Like, there's still juice left in the system. Not everybody's looked at everything, and we saw those kinds of things in the last study. I think some of Bonneville's proposals in that base case with the GAT, only being able to request things that are either market hubs or associated with some commercial transaction or desire that's pre-indicated, I think are kind of inconsistent with some of that flexibility of the system. Like, there's places that somebody may want to get to that's just like getting between Buckley and some other wine country or something, Yakima, that's not a market hub, but maybe it's a functional path, or maybe they have 5 customers in the area they want to request service for. There's lots of ways people use stuff. One of our big concerns with the proposal is that BPA was effectively prohibiting, I think, some of those common uses, and also effectively thus some of the most important parts and valuable parts of the transmission service, and also why people ultimately sign contracts with it and take some of those risks. Because like Abby said, you can sell it to somebody else later, right? And that's part of why people go through the long-term process, is because they feel safe that at the end of this, I'm still going to have it. I invest all this money. Even if I don't use it, I could sell it to somebody else or use it for a different process. I guess I just want to highlight that that's really important, and that flexibility, and I think inherently non-discriminatory access to request from anywhere on the system to anywhere on the system is one of the most important things to protect here, both so we can get the most juice out of the existing system. Last time we saw results that were really counterintuitive, that actually being some of the only awards that were made, and some of the new policies actually would probably remove those from the queue. And anyways, I guess like I said, I just want to highlight those things that Abby said are really important, and I encourage Bonneville, when they're taking the next bite at the apple, to make sure we can request, people can request kind of for whatever their version of business is, and without Bonneville sort of asserting whether it's worthy or not, and get that full versatile use out of the system as we on the customer side might seek to seek it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Okay, any other hands?
Another hands, and David, thank you for your comment in chat. We see that. But at this time, no other questions in the chat or raised hands.
Okay. I'm gonna go, oh, we've got one more.
We have David Meyer. Okay.
Go ahead, David.
David, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sometimes shy. There's a statement in the or one of the comments stated that, the issues with the RFPs, and I was curious what BPA's thoughts are. Typical RFPs for, generation resources. Utilities want to know, can they get firm transmission service, and then what their costs would be, and they want all that stuff done before they sign with the resource developer. Obviously, that causes a chicken and the egg problem, especially for BPA, where you get slammed with a whole bunch of requests, and knowingly that only a couple of those will actually be selected by utility to go forward. So just curious what BPA's thoughts were of how maybe utilities could navigate this, or the region could help navigate this to, get resources on and developed and online, but also to, speed up the process and make sure BPA is not studying tons of gigawatts of resources when they know that, a portion or a reduced portion will actually be developed.
So thanks for that question. This is Lauren Nichols-Kinas in Transmission Long-Term Planning. You've described the dilemma well and the position that it puts Bonneville in. One of the reasons that we are focusing on data exhibit validation criteria is to try to help us address that problem. At the same time, we're very cognizant of the current business model that has grown up in the Northwest, where parties who are trying to do an RFP or make a purchase want to have parties bring transmission with the offer to the table. And that is a space where we need a bunch more conversation in the region to develop maybe a more middle of the road approach, rather than something that tends to put all that variation and uncertainty for transmission planning on Bonneville, and try to create transmission planning processes that kind of are forced to try to tackle that elephant rather than the portion of it that will actually go forward. You're describing the dilemma really well.
One maybe ignorant thought I had was, allowing utilities to, I guess my selfish thought would be a utility goes out and procures transmission from a region that has, sufficient resource capability back to their load survey, back to their load, and then they could provide maybe an RFP for that area, knowing that there is no specific resource assigned for that transmission service request. There's a lot there I probably don't know the ramifications of, but
yeah, definitely appreciate any creative thinking that folks want to bring to the table on that challenging problem
in the future.
In the future state, yeah, as we go forward through this process.
David, would you mind sharing your affiliation? Sorry, I forgot that protocol at the front end of the meeting.
Yeah, I'm with Puget Sound Energy.
Thank you, David.
Okay, any other hands, Sean?
No.
Okay.
Not at this time.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us wrapped then. Thank you, everybody, for the conversation today. A lot of really good, robust conversation. Recapping again here on the next steps. Our next engagement is next week with the customer-led workshop. We're all looking forward to that. That is a hybrid, so that'll be right here in the room, and we'll have the virtual WebEx available as well. So most of us will be there in person from BPA, I think. So look forward to seeing faces in the room if you can make it. And then, like I noted, we're going to get out on Tech Forum as soon as we can, dates and information about the pre-proceeding workshop.
Sydney's asking if we want any comments on today's content or announcements.
Yeah, we can take that. We're not like doing an official comment period for it, Sydney, but as always, appreciate any feedback that you want to give us. So you can send that into tech forum. I don't have a specific date on that. I think sooner than later is great because we're firming up schedules and things. So I'd say, you know, the next week or two, if you do have feedback, that would be great to get to us.
All right. We're good.
I think we're good. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.